He gave up everything to educate his sons. Decades later, they gave it all back. A retired soldier sat quietly in his old chair, coughing hard into a handkerchief. When he pulled it away, it was stained with blood. He stared at it for a moment, then quickly folded it and slipped it into his pocket. He didn't want his sons to see. They couldn't know how sick he was. His medals hung neatly on the wall in front of him. Silver star, bronze star, purple heart. Each one came with pain, sacrifice, and stories he never told. But tomorrow morning, they'd be gone. He had made up his mind. He was going to pawn his medals to pay for his son's future. They wanted to go to Anderson Military Academy, a school that could open every door for them, but it was expensive, too expensive, and there was no money left. So Elijah Harper was going to trade his past for their future. That night, the house was quiet. His twin sons, David and Daniel, had already gone to bed. Their laughter still echoed faintly in the hallway, a reminder of the youth and hope they carried with them. Elijah stood and walked slowly over to the wall. His hand brushed lightly against the metals, the cool metal catching the last bit of sunlight that slipped through the dusty window. He reached up and unpinned each one carefully, like he was handling fragile glass. As he placed them in a small, velvet-lined box, his eyes welled with tears, not from the pain in his chest, but from the ache in his heart. These medals were part of who he was. They were more than shiny honors. They were memories of brothers lost, missions survived, and nights spent praying he'd make it home. But his boys came first. Always had. Always would. The next morning, Elijah rose early before the sun had fully climbed into the sky. The town was still half asleep as he pulled into the parking lot of Johnson's pawn shop. He stepped inside, the little bell above the door jingling softly. Old man Johnson looked up from behind the counter, surprised to see him, Elijah Harper, he said. Didn't expect you in today. Elijah didn't say much. He simply placed the small box on the counter and opened it. Johnson stared for a moment, eyes wide. He gently picked up the silver star, turning it over in his hands. "These real?" he asked quietly. Elijah nodded. "As real as the scars that came with them." There was a long silence before Johnson spoke again. "You sure about this?" "I am," Elijah said. "I need the money. It's for my boys. They've been accepted into a summer prep program. It's their shot." Johnson didn't argue. He just looked down at the medals again and gave a slow nod. He named a price. Fair, even generous. Elijah added an old pocket watch to the box to get just a little more. Enough to cover tuition, applications, and maybe one or two emergencies. "I'll keep these safe," Johnson said as Elijah turned to go. "If you ever want to buy them back." But they both knew he wouldn't. That evening, the twins came home full of energy. Daniel was talking a mile a minute about his obstacle course time. David shared what the recruiter had told him about officer training. They were glowing with hope, and Elijah did his best to smile, even as his cough started again behind the hallway door. At dinner, they talked about the academy like it was already theirs. David, the planner, had the whole next year mapped out. Daniel, always the dreamer, talked about being top of his class. Elijah listened quietly, proud and heartbroken all at once. When they asked how they could pay for it, he simply said, "Foundation helps veterans' kids." I applied. "We got it." The lie came out too easily. Daniel grinned wide and high-fived his brother. "See? I told you it would work out." Elijah forced a laugh and nodded. "Yeah, you boys just focus on making the most of it." That night, when the house went quiet again, Elijah sat alone in his chair. The wall was bare now, the outlines of the medals still faintly visible on the faded paint. He looked up at them for a long time. He didn't need a wall full of medals. to prove what kind of man he was. Tomorrow, his sons would take the first step toward a better life. And no one would know that their journey had begun with a quiet sacrifice in a small-town pawnshop. Only Elijah would know. And for him, that was enough. Elijah sat in his worn-out armchair long after the boys had gone to bed. The empty space, on the wall where his medals used to hang, looked strange, like something important had been taken away from the house. He leaned back slowly, each breath feeling heavier than the last. But inside, he felt a strange mix of sadness and peace. The next morning, the house buzzed with excitement. The twins were up early, packing their bags for the prep camp. The brochure for Anderson Military Academy was on the table, edges curled from how many times they'd read it. "Dad, they even have their own obstacle course," Daniel shouted from the hallway. David appeared with a notebook in hand, flipping pages. "This prep program covers everything: physical training, leadership, even early tactical courses." Elijah smiled weakly. "You boys are ready." Daniel walked in with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "We're more than ready." They were. Smart, strong, and driven. But what made Elijah proudest was the way they looked out for each other, like when Daniel forgot his wallet, or David stayed up late helping his brother prep for interviews. They weren't just twins, they were a team. At the bus station, the crowd was full of young hopefuls and their families. Some parents were crying. Others gave last-minute advice. Elijah stood in silence with his sons. David adjusted his uniform collar. "You've got everything?" Elijah asked, for the third time. "Yes, sir," David answered, eyes fixed on the way. "Bus?" Daniel gave his dad a tight hug. "We'll make you proud." "You already have," Elijah said, his voice cracking. He stepped back as the boys boarded the bus. He didn't wave. He didn't cry. He simply stood tall and gave them a perfect military salute, and he held it until the bus disappeared around the corner. Back home, the silence was louder than ever. The chairs at the dinner table sat untouched. The house felt too big now, too still. Elijah wandered from room to room, unsure of what to do with himself. Finally, he made his way to the old shed in the backyard, the one filled with dusty tools and half-finished wood projects. He pulled out a block of cedar wood and his carving knife. Hours passed as he worked in silence, shaping the beginnings of an eagle. His breathing became more labored and his cough more frequent. But he didn't stop. Carving helped him think. It helped him feel useful. It helped him forget the pain. For a little while. A few days later, there was a knock at the door. "Mr. Harper?" a young voice called. "It's me, Jalen." Elijah opened the door to find the neighborhood boy, holding a broken toy airplane. "I heard you fix things," Jalen said shyly. Elijah smiled faintly. "Sometimes. Come on in." Jalen had lost his own father, a Marine who died in a training accident. Since then, he had been drifting, searching for something or someone to anchor to. Elijah saw the look in his eyes. It was the same one he had seen in his own reflection after war. That afternoon, Elijah showed Jalen how to use sandpaper, how to watch the grain of the wood, how to carve steady and smooth. They didn't talk much, but somehow, it felt like they said a lot. Over the next few weeks, Jalen kept coming back. They worked on small projects together, wooden birds, a toy tank, a carved flag. Elijah found comfort in the boy's presence. And maybe, just maybe, Jalen found a little comfort in Elijah too. But even as these quiet moments gave Elijah peace, his health continued to get worse. The coughing came more often now, deeper, louder. At night, he sometimes woke up gasping. The pills helped for a while, but his body was growing tired. The referral slip from the VA clinic still sat in his glove compartment, crumpled and ignored. One evening, after Jalen left, Elijah sat on the porch, watching the sky fade from gold to deep blue. He thought about the medals. He thought about the day he earned the Silver Star, dragging a wounded soldier through enemy fire, terrified but refusing to leave him behind. He thought about the day he handed that same medal to a pawn shop owner in exchange for hope. And he thought about his sons, away at the academy, chasing dreams he never dared to chase for himself. Inside, the phone rang. He let it go to voicemail. He didn't need words right now. He just needed to remember, to sit, to breathe, to hold on to whatever strength he had left, because he knew. The hardest part wasn't over. It was still coming, and he had to be ready for it, because his sons were counting on him, even if they didn't know it yet. 5 years passed like leaves carried in the wind, one season melting into the next. Elijah's house stayed the same, but inside, everything had changed. The once loud home was now silent. The boys had grown into men, each walking his own path. David, always the focused one, graduated top of his class at Anderson Military Academy and was quickly recruited into Special Forces. Discipline suited him. Rules gave him purpose. His room back home, untouched, still had the same folded blanket and perfectly stacked books, just like he'd left it. Daniel, on the other hand, had taken a different road. Though he also excelled, he was never one to accept things as they were. He entered military intelligence. He questioned everything: orders, strategy, the reasons behind every mission. Where David found comfort in the chain of command, Daniel searched for meaning behind it. At first, their bond stayed strong. They called home often. They shared the same tired jokes and sent each other inside jokes from their academy days. Elijah listened on speakerphone with a proud grin, eyes closed, just soaking in the sound of his sons' voices. But over time, something changed. It started subtly. Missed calls, shorter messages. Elijah noticed it first. When David called, he rarely mentioned Daniel. And when Daniel called, his tone carried an edge, like something had been left unsaid for too long. Then came the silence. Elijah asked once, gently, "You boys doing all right?" David answered first, voice tight. "We're busy. He's doing his thing, I'm doing mine." Daniel just sighed. "We don't exactly see eye to eye anymore, Dad." Elijah didn't push. He'd seen this before. In war, in life. Sometimes people drift apart, not because they want to, but because the world pulls them in different directions. And sometimes, it's pride that keeps them apart. He hoped it would pass. But then came the mission, the one that changed everything. Was supposed to be routine, a joint operation overseas, a possible weapons cache hidden in an abandoned village. Daniel's team was tracking satellite data and intercepted communications. David was leading the ground unit. Elijah didn't know the details, only that something went wrong. What little he gathered came weeks later, in pieces. From whispers, from awkward pauses during phone calls. During the mission, David had given the command to hold position. Orders had come from higher up: clear the target area, confirmed threat. But Daniel saw something different through his scope. Civilians, a woman and a small child. "Hold your position," David said through the radio. "There are people in there," Daniel replied. "Those aren't our orders. There's a kid, David. Don't do this." But Daniel did it anyway. He broke cover, moved toward the building, yelling for the civilians to run. Within minutes, the airstrike came. The civilians survived. But so did the fallout. The mission was called compromised. Intelligence said the building had no hostiles. Daniel was written up for insubordination, but the report quietly praised his judgment. It was a political mess, and no one came out clean. David didn't speak up at the inquiry. He followed protocol. He stayed quiet. When the dust settled, Daniel was reassigned. David kept climbing the ranks. and they stopped calling each other. Completely. Elijah noticed immediately. The silence between his sons now felt like a wall, tall and cold. His calls with them grew shorter. They never asked about each other. It was like the string between them had been cut. It broke his heart. He tried once calling them both on speakerphone. He thought maybe hearing each other again would spark something. Laughter, maybe even a simple hello. But the call was awkward, the silence between them louder than their words. It ended quickly. Afterward, Elijah sat alone at the kitchen table, rubbing his temples. The coughs were worse now. His legs ached all the time. Sleep came in pieces, and food had lost its taste. But none of that hurt as much as seeing his boys grow distant. They had always been stronger together. He remembered when they were small, how they would build snow forts without needing to talk. Daniel dreaming it up, David figuring out how to make it stand. That memory stuck with him like an old photograph. Outside, the neighborhood boy, Jalen, now a teenager, still came by often. He'd grown tall, his voice deeper, his confidence stronger. He helped Elijah with chores, asked questions, listened. One afternoon, while sanding wood together, Jalen looked over. "Mr. Harper, you ever stop missing your family?" Elijah paused. "No," he said, "but sometimes missing them reminds you how much they matter." Jalen didn't answer, just nodded slowly. Later that night, Elijah pulled out an old VHS tape again. The one with footage from his last major tour. He watched the grainy image of a younger him, laughing in the desert sun, surrounded by soldiers he hadn't seen in years. Then he looked at the wall, still empty. His medals weren't there, but the space they left behind still was. He picked up his pen, opened a notebook, and began to write. He didn't know if his sons would ever reconcile, or if they'd ever forgive each other. But he could still give them something that might help them understand. Not orders. Not advice, just the truth. And maybe that would be enough. The wind outside Elijah's house carried the chill of early winter. Leaves scraped across the porch as he sat bundled in an old army jacket, hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug. He watched the sun rise over the sleepy street, but his mind was somewhere else. Far away, deep in the past. Inside, on the kitchen table, sat the notebook he had started just days earlier. Pages filled with his rough handwriting, memories, regrets, things he never spoke about. But he knew time was running out. His coughs were louder, deeper now. They left him breathless and aching. The pills weren't helping like they used to. The doctor had warned him, gently but firmly, without treatment, things would get worse quickly. Still, Elijah hadn't gone back to the hospital. He kept thinking about his boys. He still hadn't told them the truth. Miles away, Daniel sat hunched over his desk, files scattered everywhere. His small apartment was dark except for the glow of his laptop screen. It had started with a name, Project Ember. He wasn't sure why it stuck in his mind at first. He'd seen the reference during a routine assignment, buried deep in an old classified folder. It was linked to an operation his father had been involved in, one Elijah never talked about. Daniel dug deeper. Every path he followed led to dead ends, redacted reports, files missing, names blacked out. But something didn't sit right. His instincts, sharp and finely trained, told him there was more, much more. He submitted a request through back channels for military archives. That got him flagged. A quiet message came from someone at the Pentagon. "Why are you digging into old ghosts, Lieutenant?" He didn't answer. He kept going. The deeper he went, the darker it got. Project Ember wasn't just some old operation. It was buried for a reason. He found a list of units involved, and there it was. Harper, E. His father. Next to the name, the word discharged stood out like a bruise. But Elijah hadn't just retired. That much was clear now. Something had forced him out. Daniel stared at the screen, jaw tight. His father, decorated, respected, and strong, had lived the rest of his life in silence. Why? Why did a man like that give up his medals, stay in a small town, and never talk about his service? The answer had to be buried in Project Ember. Back in Millfield, Elijah was carving again. His hands slower now, less steady. Jalen, now almost 15, sat beside him. The teen spoke less these days, but his loyalty had only grown. "You ever think about going back, Mr. Harper?" Jalen asked one day, sanding down a rough corner. "Back where?" "To the army. You ever miss it?" Elijah paused. "I miss some of the people. Not all of what we did." Jalen nodded, sensing the weight behind those words. Later that afternoon, Elijah stumbled while walking from the garage. Jalen caught him just in time. "You okay?" "Just tired," Elijah said, brushing it off. But his skin was pale, his breath shallow. Jalen didn't push, but that night he stayed awake, worried. Meanwhile, Daniel reached out to a former contact, someone in defense contracting who owed him a favor. "You ever hear of Armitage Solutions?" he asked. The man on the other end went quiet. "Why do you want to know?" "They're tied to Project Ember. That's not a trail you want to follow, Harper." "Why not?" "Because people who do don't always make it to the end." Daniel hung up, but he was more certain than ever. His father had been part of something that should never have happened, and someone had made sure it stayed buried. That night, he pulled out an old photo album. Inside was a picture of his dad in uniform, medals proudly pinned to his chest. That photo used to be his favorite. Now it only raised questions. How could a man who'd saved lives be erased so quietly? The next day, Daniel did something he hadn't done in over a year. He called his brother. David answered after a long pause. "It's been a while." "We need to talk," Daniel said. "It's about Dad." A pause. "Is he okay?" "No, and he's been hiding it. But this isn't about his health. It's about what he did. Back in the war. Project Ember. Armitage. Solutions. It's all connected." David's voice dropped. "Daniel, this isn't a secure line. I don't care. I'm not stopping." "You should," David said flatly. "Whatever you're digging into, let it go." "I can't." Daniel ended the call. Back in Millfield, Elijah was writing again. He had recorded 2 video messages for his sons, one for David, one for Daniel. In them, he spoke not as a soldier, but as a father. "David," he said, voice raspy but steady, "you always followed orders, even when they broke your heart, but you've got a conscience too. Don't lose it. Daniel, your heart always led you. That's your strength and sometimes your danger. Be smart. Don't run toward every fire." Then came the hard part. He began telling the truth about that mission, about what he'd seen, what he'd done, and what he'd refused to do. How he had gone against orders to save innocent people, and how he'd paid the price for it in silence. That same night, Jalen stopped by the pawn shop, looking for a gift for his mom. He noticed something in the display case, a bronze star with Elijah's name on it. "Where did this come from?" he asked. The shop owner looked up. "Belongs to a hero, been holding it for years." Jalen stared at the metal. Something inside him clicked. He had to get it back. Outside, winter winds howled down Main Street. Inside a quiet house on Oak Street, an old soldier sat alone, a lifetime of secrets pressing heavy on his chest. And miles away, his son stared at a computer screen full of redacted lies, ready to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The past wasn't finished with them yet. It was just beginning. A storm rolled over Millfield the day everything changed. Rain fell steady on the roof of Elijah Harper's old house, the drops tapping like soft footsteps overhead. Inside, the lights were off. He sat in his chair, wrapped in a worn blanket, his eyes heavy with fatigue. On the small table beside him sat a flash drive. Inside it, his truth, his story, his final gift to his sons. He hadn't told them yet, but they would hear it when they were ready. Elijah's thoughts drifted to his medals, not the ones in the pawn shop, but the moments behind them, the screams, the sand, the blood. He remembered standing over Peterson's body, whispering a prayer even though he hadn't been to church in years. He remembered the order that came through his headset, no survivors, and how he had ignored it. That choice had cost him everything, but he never once regretted it. Hundreds of miles away, Daniel leaned over his laptop, the glow from the screen painting shadows across his face. Sleep was no longer part of his routine. Coffee had replaced meals. His eyes were red from scanning declassified documents, cross-checking timelines, digging deeper into Project Ember and the people behind it. What he had found so far made his blood run cold. Project Ember had begun as a covert operation targeting a rogue scientist working on biological weapons. That was the story on paper. But the deeper files, some buried beneath layers of encryption, told a different truth. The scientist wasn't alone. There had been a village, civilians, test subjects, and someone had ordered the entire site wiped from the map. Daniel stared at a grainy photo embedded in one of the files. The corner of a tent, a chalkboard, children, and at the bottom, scribbled in the margin, Harper refused. His father hadn't just been involved, he had stood against what happened. The evidence was incomplete, but the story was forming. Elijah had disobeyed a direct order to evacuate civilians, possibly saving dozens of lives, and someone in power had buried it. If the truth came out, it could rock the very foundations of those institutions, which was exactly why Daniel knew he needed help. He picked up his phone and made a call to someone from his early intelligence days, a journalist, quiet, careful, trusted. "I have something," he said. "Something big, but I can't be the only one holding it." Back in Millfield, Jalen pedaled through the rain, water streaming from his jacket hood. In his backpack was a small wooden eagle he had carved for Elijah, its wings unfinished, just like the truth he felt circling their lives. He rode to the pawn shop and pressed his face to the glass. The bronze star was still there. He had saved for weeks, doing odd jobs, mowing lawns, washing cars. That medal didn't belong in a glass case. It belonged with the man who earned it. Sturkur. Johnson opened the door with a tired smile. "Jalen, back again?" The boy stepped inside, water dripping from his sleeves. "I have enough now." The shop owner raised an eyebrow. "For what?" Jalen opened his backpack and pulled out a worn envelope filled with bills and coins. He placed it gently on the counter. "For Elijah's medal." Johnson stared at the boy, then at the envelope. "You know what this is, right?" Jalen nodded. "I know it's not just metal. It's a story. And it doesn't belong here." With a sigh, Johnson reached into the display case and handed it over. "He's lucky to have someone like you, son." Jalen held the medal carefully in his hands, like it was made of glass. And that night, when Elijah was too tired to speak, too weak to get up, Jalen placed the medal quietly on the table beside him. "I brought this back," he whispered, "because the world should know who you are." Elijah blinked at the medal. His fingers trembled as they reached for it. Then, with great effort, he looked up at the boy. "Thank you," he rasped. "More than you know." The next day, the story broke. Daniel hadn't expected it to move this fast, but once the reporter had the flash drive, they ran with it. By sunrise, headlines were popping up across the internet. Decorated veterans silenced after saving civilians, a forgotten act of heroism. The Harper File, Project Ember Secrets, begin to unravel. An old photo of Elijah in uniform filled the screen. Beside it, a headline in bold, "He gave everything for his sons. Now they fight to clear his name." The article didn't reveal everything, just enough to raise eyebrows. Enough to send military spokespeople scrambling to prepare statements. Enough to make a few powerful people nervous. Daniel's phone rang constantly. Some calls were supportive. Others, not so much. Threats, warnings. Back off. Let it go. You don't know what you're walking into. But it was too late for silence now. David called too, his voice quiet but sharp. "Did you leak it?" Daniel hesitated. "A journalist did, but yeah, it came from me." David sighed. "Do you know what they'll do to Dad if this blows up?" "They already did it," Daniel said. "I'm just shining a light on it." Back in Millfield, Elijah watched the coverage on Jalen's phone with tired eyes. He didn't say much, just watched in silence as the world finally began to hear his story. Later, he whispered, "It's not about the medals, it's about the people. I just didn't want them forgotten." "You won't be," Jalen said softly, and he meant it. That night, while Elijah slept, Jalen sat at the kitchen table, staring at the bronze star. Then he reached for Elijah's phone, scrolled to the video app, and found the confession his mentor had recorded. He hit upload. He didn't ask for permission, because sometimes telling the truth is the most respectful thing you can do for someone who gave everything. By morning, Elijah Harper's face was on every major news outlet. His voice, raw, honest, brave, played on repeat across social media. Millions watched. A man too tired to fight anymore, speaking for those who couldn't. Project Ember was no longer a buried file, it was a storm, and it was just getting started. The morning after Elijah's video went public, the world was no longer quiet. By noon, millions had seen it. A soft-spoken, dying man on a couch, his voice raspy, eyes sunken but clear, speaking about a decision that had haunted him for decades. The orders he'd refused, the people he saved, the silence he'd been forced to keep. It wasn't just a confession, it was a warning, and it spread like wildfire. Veterans groups began sharing it across social media. Journalists dissected every word. Some called it heroic, others called it dangerous. Military spokespeople went silent, and Armitage Solutions, the private contractor tied to Project Ember, scrubbed their website overnight, but the truth had already gotten out, and now it was knocking on Daniel's door. The knock came early, just as Daniel was finishing his second cup of black coffee. He opened the door expecting a package. Instead, two plainclothes federal agents stood on the porch, holding a folder and a warrant. "Lieutenant Daniel Harper?" the taller one asked. Daniel nodded slowly. "We're here on behalf of the Department of Justice. You're being summoned to appear before a federal inquiry. We also have a warrant to search your residence and seize any devices used to transmit or distribute classified information." Daniel didn't resist. He knew this was coming. Inside, they bagged his laptop, his hard drives, even the framed photo of his father that sat beside the desk. As they were leaving, one agent paused. "For what it's worth?" he said quietly, glancing at the photo. "I hope they tell the whole story." Meanwhile, in Washington, David sat in his Pentagon office, staring at a paused video of Elijah's confession. The screen was frozen on his father's face, one eye slightly closed from exhaustion, lips parted mid-sentence. He'd watched it 5 times already. Each time he'd heard something different, something not just about their father, but about himself. He didn't hear a soldier breaking rank. He heard a man trying to protect what mattered most. And now, David had to decide what kind of man he wanted to be, because earlier that morning, he'd received an urgent summons from his commanding officer. "Captain Harper," the general said. sliding a file across the table. "We need to talk." Inside the folder were classified memos. Some old, some recent. His brother's name was in them. So was Elijah's. "You know what's at stake here. Your brother has jeopardized national security, and now your father's story is putting the entire institution at risk. We need you to publicly distance yourself from both of them." David stared at the general, silent. "There's a promotion on the table for you," the man continued. "Major, and full clearance to lead your own unit. But if you don't cooperate, this is as far as your career goes." David stood slowly. "With all due respect, sir," he said, voice calm but steady, "my father taught me that leadership without integrity is just control. I won't disown the truth to keep a title." Then he placed his rank insignia on the table and walked out. Back in Millfield, Elijah was too weak to leave his bed. The news kept playing on the TV, but his eyes were often closed, his breathing shallow. Jalen sat at his side, reading comments from viewers. "Someone in Kentucky says your story reminded him of his father," he whispered. "A nurse from Kansas wrote that she never believed in heroes until now." Elijah didn't respond. His eyes stayed shut, so Jalen just kept reading. "I thought people forgot," Elijah finally murmured, voice so soft it was almost a breath. "But they didn't." "No, sir," Jalen whispered back. "They're remembering you." 3 days later, Daniel's hearing began. It was held in a small federal building, no cameras, no press. But word had already spread. Crowds gathered outside, holding signs. "Truth matters." "Justice for Elijah." "Honor the honorable." Inside, Daniel sat at the defendant's table, wearing a simple gray suit, hands folded, heart pounding. Tss. His side was Sarah, the attorney who had stepped up to defend him. "You good?" she whispered. Daniel nodded. "Let's do this." The prosecution laid out its argument. Unauthorized release of classified files, breach of national security, disgrace to the uniform. But Sarah fought back, with precision, with evidence, and with emotion. She called forward Ava Carter, the former officer who had served with Elijah in Project Ember. Now in hiding for her own safety, she appeared via secure video link. Her testimony silenced the room. "Elijah Harper didn't just disobey a command," she said. "He saved lives. I was there. I watched him carry children through gunfire. I watched him stand between innocent people and a direct order to erase them." "Who gave the order?" the prosecutor asked. "I don't know their name," Ava said, "but it came from someone high up. Armitage Solutions was there, and they didn't want survivors." "Why did you stay silent until now?" "Because I was scared," she said, voice shaking. "But I'm not scared anymore. Not because I'm brave, but because Elijah was." Outside, David arrived at the courthouse still in uniform, despite resigning days earlier. When reporters swarmed him, he said only one thing: "I came to stand with my brother." Then he walked through the doors. In court, he testified under oath. He spoke of their father's silence, the weight of his actions, and how Daniel had shown more courage by telling the truth than most do in combat. After 3 long days, the jury deliberated. Then came the verdict. Not guilty. Daniel sat frozen as the words sank in. He wasn't just free. His father's story was now part of the official record. That evening, as they stood outside the courthouse, Daniel looked at David. "You didn't have to show up." David smiled. "You're my brother." He hesitated, then added, "And you were right." For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then David pulled something from his pocket, the silver star, the same medal Elijah had once traded away. "Johnson kept it all these years," he said. "He wanted us to have it." Daniel stared at the medal, eyes glassy. "Let's give it back to Dad." Back in Millfield, the sky was soft with sunset. Inside Elijah's room, Jalen sat holding his hand. The door opened. David and Daniel stepped. Inside, their father's eyes fluttered open. "We won, Dad," David whispered. "The world knows now." Elijah blinked, a smile barely forming on his lips. "You boys," Daniel leaned in, "you don't have to carry it alone anymore." They placed the silver star beside him on the blanket, and for the first time in years, Elijah Harper rested. The next morning, the skies over Millfield were calm. The town was unusually quiet for a weekday, as if holding its breath. Inside Millfield General Hospital, Elijah Harper was resting, his breathing light and uneven. The monitors blinked steadily beside him, but no alarms sounded yet. At his side, David and Daniel sat close, each holding one of their father's hands. Their uniforms were pressed. Their medals, each hard-earned, rested in their pockets. They had taken turns through the night, sharing stories, memories, and sometimes just sitting in silence. Sometimes love didn't need words, just presence. Jalen arrived early, carrying a folded flag and a box tucked under his arm. He had spent all night carving. The small wooden eagle, now complete, had wings stretched wide, feathers carved with fine care. He placed it gently on the windowsill, facing the sunlight. "He always said eagles don't fly backward," Jalen whispered. David looked over. "Then he'd want us to move forward, but not forget." Daniel nodded. "We won't." At exactly 10:12 a.m., Elijah stirred. His eyes opened slowly, cloudy but clear enough to see the faces around him. "You stayed," he whispered. "We're not going anywhere, Dad," Daniel said. "We've got your 6, David added, squeezing his hand. Elijah gave the faintest smile. "Good boys." His gaze drifted to the medal lying on his chest. The silver star, returned at last. "I got it back," he whispered. "Didn't think I would." "You never really lost it," Daniel said. "You just passed it forward." Elijah's breathing slowed again, but his voice, though soft, was steady. Tell them the truth matters." "We will," David promised. Elijah closed his eyes once more, and just like that, a soft alarm began to beep. Doctors moved quickly, nurses rushing in, but the sons already knew. Elijah Harper, father, soldier, hero, was gone. He had given everything, and in the end, he had seen the truth come home. The news spread quickly. Within an hour, Elijah Harper was trending on every major social platform. His name was no longer just part of a buried operation. It was part of the national conscience. Veterans across the country shared his story. Old war buddies called into radio shows, saying things they'd never had the courage to before. "He saved lives," one man said. "They told us to keep quiet." Elijah never forgot. At the White House press briefing, the Secretary of Defense paused before answering the first question. The department has initiated a full review of Project Ember. And, per the President's directive, Master Sergeant, Elijah Harper will receive posthumous recognition for actions above and beyond the call of duty. A new medal was being prepared. The Medal of Honor. Elijah's funeral was held 3 days later, not at a local church, but in the field just behind the school where Jalen and the twins used to play. The largest space in Millfield, and still not. Large enough, hundreds came, then thousands. Veterans in dress uniforms, families carrying flags, strangers who only knew his story through a screen, but felt like they knew the man himself. The ceremony began at sunset. The honor guard marched in perfect rhythm. A riderless horse led the procession. A folded flag lay gently across Elijah's casket. David stood at the podium first, his voice calm and clear. "Our father taught us that being a soldier isn't about what you wear on your chest. It's about what you carry in your heart. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say no." Then Daniel stepped forward. He gave up everything, his medals, his career, his comfort, so we could chase our dreams, so others could live. And he never asked for anything in return. They stepped aside as Jalen, now dressed in a neatly pressed jacket and tie, walked to the front, holding something in his hands. It was Elijah's old notebook. "I found this the day he died," Jalen said softly. He wrote one line on the last page, "Maybe someday the world will understand why I gave it all away." He paused. Well, today's that day. After the funeral, medals began appearing on the casket, not just Elijah's, but from others, men. And women, some barely able to walk, stepped forward and placed their own medals, purple hearts, bronze stars, ribbons of all kinds, beside his. By the end of the evening, Elijah's casket held 100 medals, none awarded by a government, all earned by lives he touched. A month later, a new plaque was installed outside the Pentagon. It read, "Elijah. Harper, soldier, father, conscience. Some heroes wear medals. Some give them away so others can earn their own." Below the plaque, a bronze eagle stood guard, its wings carved from a design first made by a 14-year-old boy named Jalen. The carving had been donated by David and Daniel, and now stood as part of a permanent display inside the newly renamed Harper Center for Ethical Leadership. Years passed. David became a military ethics instructor, sharing his father's story in lecture halls across the country. Daniel founded the Harper Whistleblower Defense Fund, helping soldiers who were punished for doing the right thing. Jalen? He was now Cadet Williams, a West Point graduate, proudly wearing a small pin on his collar, the eagle. He never missed a chance to tell new recruits about the man who taught him to sand wood, carve wings, and follow his gut, no matter the cost. 1. Crisp autumn day, the Harper brothers stood on the porch of their father's old home. The house had been turned into a small museum. Visitors came weekly to hear the story, to see the wall where medals once hung, now replaced by letters from families Elijah had saved. David looked out over the street. "You think he'd be proud?" Daniel nodded. He already was. They stepped down the porch stairs, side by side, just as they had in their youth. The world had changed, because one man chose truth over silence, because two sons chose courage over comfort, and because a boy with a wooden carving chose to let the eye world see what a quiet hero really looked like.